Hello and welcome to this edition of Joy in Our Town. My name is Ferrell Tata, I'm your host, and today I'm delighted to welcome my guest, Ellen Fithian. Ellen is the founder of the Hampton Roads Educational Consulting, and our issue today is education, and our topic is SAT and ACT preparation. Ellen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to the program. So, first of all, tell us a little bit about Hampton Roads Educational Consulting. What do you do and how did that come about?
Well, I actually got into education in sort of a strange way. In my first life, I was a dermatologist, and I'm married to a physician. And when we first finished our training in New York, we decided to move to Virginia for his job. And at that time, we had 3 children, 4 and under. So I decided to take some time off from medicine to be a full-time mom. And that turned into about 13 years, and we added a 4th child. And I became very interested in education, very involved with schools during that time. So when my youngest was in school full-time, I was ready to go back into the workplace, but I decided to make a career change. So I went back to school to get a PhD in education at William & Mary, and worked there for a little while, and then decided to start my own business about 10 years ago. But while I was at William & Mary, I had the opportunity to intern in the admissions office. And so that's always been sort of an interest of mine, the transition between high school and college.
And how important are the SAT and ACT tests in college admissions?
They're very important. In fact, they're more important today than they were 20 years ago. There has been an increasing trend for grade inflation, and also colleges have become more competitive. So when they're trying to make decisions and they have students who all have great grades, the SAT and the ACT does a really good job of differentiating students. So while the statistics from the College Board show that currently about 48% of SAT test takers have a self-reported GPA of the A- or higher. But if you look at SAT scores, only 5% of students get a 700 or higher on the math, critical reading, or writing. So that's a very good way to sort of spread those students out. And so I think it will be with us, for the foreseeable future.
Now, if you have a student and let's say they are taking really challenging courses and they're making really good grades, will a college or university, will they overlook a more mediocre test result?
And to a certain extent, the competitive schools are always doing a holistic review. So they're going to look at everything, and they're going to take that into account. But the problem is that students who are applying at very competitive colleges are competing against other students who also have good grades and have extracurriculars. And so it does put them at a bit of a disadvantage. I think there's really no getting around that. Though there are some colleges that now don't require the SAT. So that's sort of a last ditch thing if a student really can't get their scores to where they want them to be.
Are we going to see that more and more? I was sort of surprised when some universities said that they weren't going to require that.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think we've seen some of the competitive schools like Wake Forest drop the requirement, and they have reported that they've looked at those students who came in without submitting scores and they still perform very well. So I think that from the point of view, are colleges worried about students who don't submit scores? I don't think they are. But going back to what I was saying initially, it does make it easier for them to differentiate between good students.
Right. Now, can a student really improve the SAT score by studying, or is it, as some say, an IQ test that they can't really
They
improve?
Absolutely can, and I think that's one of the biggest myths that I hope people will come away from this show having a different idea about. Many people do think that the SAT is basically an IQ test, but it's very much something that you can study for. It's a very complicated test. You have 10 sections. Each of those has different directions. There are strategies about, should you try to rush through and get done or take your time? Should you guess? If you don't know those things, you're just putting yourself at a disadvantage. And also in today's world, a lot of students are preparing. So if you're walking in cold, you're putting yourself at a significant disadvantage.
So you would be a big proponent of encouraging kids to take the practice exams and actually test them to
Absolutely.
just get used to.
Absolutely, and there are a lot of different ways to prepare for the SAT or the ACT. The good news is they all work if a student actually does them. You know, the cheapest way is to just get the prep books. There are no secrets in the world of SAT prep. It's all in the workbook. But the problem is that they have to have the discipline to sit down for a couple of hours a day and actually do it,
Right.
which a lot of teenagers are pretty candid about saying that they don't. So that's one way. The test prep classes can be a good approach. If a student takes a class through one of the larger organizations, they will cover everything and they'll have several practice tests as part of that. But those are not ideal for students who have a very uneven profile. So sometimes you'll see students who go in and take it the first time and they will get a very high score on math, but a lower score on critical reading. So if they already have a high score in math, it may not be the best use of their time to go through a class that's going to divide that instruction evenly.
Right.
So that's one group. Another group that may not be ideally served by a full class are the students who are starting with high scores. Because much of what will be in that class they've already learned.
Oh, right.
So their time might be better spent with individual study. Tutoring is a very effective approach because it allows the instructor to really customize. And so you can target a student's individual areas that need to be explored. And so that's a very good way to prepare, but of course that's the most expensive.
Right.
Generally, I think whatever technique students want to go with, I encourage them to look at it as sort of a four-stage approach. And for students, I use an analogy of a sports team. So the first is to plan. You know, if you're on a team and the coach is not going to say, you know, we have our games coming up and I want everyone to go home and spend some time, you know, dribbling for basketball. You're going to plan regular time that you're going to devote to practice. So planning is the first step. Next is to prepare. And you know, you're not going to leave it up to the students to decide, if you're the coach, what skills do they need to learn. You're not going to just say, go out and play basketball and you'll get better. You're going to pick specific things. But third is you have to play practice games. I mean, everyone who's ever been on a team knows that the way that you play when you're just fooling around is different when you're in a game. Right. So you have to take practice tests for the SAT. And finally, there's a performance element. You know, you would not, if you're going to the state tournament, you would not go out with your friends, hopefully, the night before. But a lot of kids don't translate that. You know, they'll come in, and if they're working with me, and I ask them, you know, when have you taken the SAT, and what were the circumstances, it's not uncommon for them to say, well, you know, I was out with my friends the night before, or we all got together at Chick-fil-A the morning of. So you have to realize that this is a grueling test. It's 3 hours and 45 minutes. You need to really bring your energy, bring your A game.
Right. And what do you, in your opinion, what is the best time to start taking the SAT? I know I had a friend who had his daughter take it at 14 just because he wanted her to experience it. But is there a right age to take it for the first time?
And that's also a really important consideration. I think a very common pattern is for students to take the PSAT as their first exposure in 11th grade. And then when they get their scores back, they'll use those scores to determine how much they should practice and take it again in the spring of junior year. But the problem with that strategy is really twofold. That first, the PSAT shouldn't be viewed as a practice SAT because it is also the qualifying exam for the National Merit Competition. So it's not something that you want to go into without having prepared. And the other thing is that by the time students get their PSAT scores, they get them from their counselor, and it's often not until late December. So by that time, they're into the junior year, which is typically the busiest year. they really don't have time to do any prep. So I advise students to do the major test prep the summer after sophomore year. Then take the test along with the PSAT in October. And then it gives them another summer after 11th grade if they need to really do more practice.
And now the SAT subject test, I know some schools are requiring that or encourage. Who should take those and when should they take those?
And those SAT subject tests, a lot of people don't even know about. Those are 1-hour multiple choice tests on particular academic areas. And the only students who really have to worry about those are students who are applying to very competitive colleges. So your Ivy League schools, schools like MIT, Stanford. Within the Virginia Public University universe, only UVA requests them or recommends them. Even they don't require them. So it really depends on where you're applying. But certainly if a student is targeting one of those very competitive schools, the best time to take it is usually the end of the year when they're studying that topic.
And the SAT and the ACT, are they very different?
They are quite different. The SAT always starts with the essay, and then you have 9 more short sections that range from 10 minutes to 25 minutes. And they go back and forth in sort of a random way, from critical reading to math to writing. The ACT, you have 4 tests. They're always in the same order. So you'll take your English test and then you're done. Then you move on to math, reading, and science. So it's a lot more predictable in the format, and a lot of students like that. The ACT is also considered to be more a test of achievement, where the SAT is a skills test. And you really do see that difference.
Right.
The SAT, for example, the math questions are very much logical reasoning. So many students find that off-putting because they've learned how to do a problem a certain way, and now the SAT is going to come and ask them to solve it a different way. And so some people thrive on that. You know, they think this is really fun, it's challenging, and other kids just freeze.
Right.
So the ACT is more of an achievement test. The ACT also doesn't have vocabulary per se, so for some students that's an advantage, and it has a science section, which the SAT doesn't. So the bottom line is they're very different. I encourage all students to take both and see which one favors them.
Now, if they did really well on one and just so-so on the other, can they just submit the one that they did better on? Like
yes, generally they can. And generally the colleges will take whichever is your better. If you submit them both, they will take your better score. Because eventually, if a student is accepted, that student's score becomes the college's score. And so they always are going to put your best foot forward.
Now, what would you say to a student if their scores remain low, even after they had taken preparation, they had practiced? What would you say to that student?
Then I would say, you know, if they have time, go through another session of preparation. So if it's the end of 11th grade, use that summer to prepare again. Try the other test. If they've taken the SAT, try the ACT, or vice versa. And then finally look for those colleges that either don't emphasize the standardized testing as much, or that don't require it at all.
Well, Ellen, thank you so much for being with us, and we are going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about actual college planning. My guest today is Ellen Fithian. She's with Hampton Roads Educational Consulting, and I'm Ferrell Tata. This is Join Our Town, and we hope you'll stay tuned. We'll be right back. Thank you. Hello, and welcome back to Joy in Our Town. My name is Ferrell Tata, and I'm being joined today by Ellen Fithian, the founder of Hampton Roads Education Consulting, and our issue today is education, and we're going to switch gears and talk about college planning. Thank you again. Welcome back. So, Ellen, when should families start beginning to think seriously about preparing for college?
I think probably the ideal time is the beginning of sophomore year. That's a good time for families to start looking at colleges, making those campus trips. At that point, it's fun. When students get to be juniors, they're very busy, they're more involved in their extracurriculars, and they're beginning to experience the stress of thinking about will they get into the college. So it becomes a little bit less enjoyable for them. So I think really to start and to stretch this out so it doesn't get piled up and doesn't become overwhelming, the best time is really the beginning of sophomore year.
Now, you had mentioned earlier that you actually worked in college admissions at William & Mary. What are some of the most important things that admission people look for in their applicants?
Right, and that was really a fascinating experience to be able to do an internship in the admission office. And basically, all colleges are looking at 6 factors that fall into 2 categories. The first category is your academic, and that's really going to be the most important, regardless of college. So they're looking at what courses have you taken. And at William & Mary, the first thing that they told us to do is look at the courses. Because the rigor of the coursework, it's kind of like the strength of a fabric if you're making a dress. I mean, if the fabric is no good, nothing good can come of it. And then looking at the grades in specific courses. So of course your college preparatory grades are going to be more important. It's better to get an A in calculus than in foods of the world. So we look at that. Then the standardized testing is the third most important. But then at your schools like William & Mary or your very competitive colleges, the next category will also be important, and that's your personal qualities. So that's where they'll be looking at your extracurricular activities, your service activities, your letters of recommendation from your school counselor and your teachers, and then finally your personal statement and any essays that might ask. So all of those things are important, and the more competitive the college, and by that I mean the lower the acceptance rate, the more those personal qualities will factor in.
Now, I'm glad you talked about the rigor of the course selection. So for a student, is it more important that they take honors and AP and IB classes and do mediocre in that, or take something that's a little easier but make straight A's or A pluses?
And that's a common question if parents go to information sessions at colleges. Someone will always ask, is it better to take a regular course and get an A, or to take an AP course and get a B? And the answer is always, it's better to take an AP course and get an A. So obviously that's the ideal world. But I think that it's a fine line, and really what parents want to help their students do is to find that point where they can be taking rigorous courses but still succeeding, because it also doesn't help to overload and end up with B's and C's. So you really need to sort of say, you know, where will your child be successful?
Right. And I would like you to talk a little bit about the extracurricular activities, because I know I remember a parent saying, don't let your child, don't put the mission trip to Africa, because everyone's doing mission trip in Africa now. So what are some of the extracurricular activities that admission officers are looking for?
And they are very interested in extracurricular activities. And I think one question that many parents have is, why do they care? But I think that what they're looking is, they want students who are not only going to excel in the classroom, but who will contribute to the college community. So they don't want a student who is going to have to study in their room 24/7 to get good grades. They're looking for a student who has the reserve to be active in other activities and to still do well in the classroom. Now, as far as the types of activities and the profile, I think this is one area where a lot of parents give well-meaning but misinformed advice. Because a generation ago, colleges were looking for the well-rounded student. And today, it's changed. So while they do want to see some evidence of well-roundedness, they really will talk about having a well-rounded class made up of well-lopsided students. So they're looking for students who really have made a serious commitment to 2 or 3 activities. And by that, they're looking at students who've committed time, who have excelled, and also who've shown leadership. So, so really the ideal thing is for a student to find something that they really like and then commit a lot of time to that. And the leadership is something too that a lot of students will say, well, you know, I'm not a politician. How do I show leadership if I don't want to be the officer? And so ways to do that would be, you know, to expand an organization, you know, to come up with something innovative. That's a way to show leadership without being the president.
And what about community service hours? Is there a certain number of hours that applicant should shoot for?
And that's also a common question. One thing I would say, the colleges are not looking for a certain number of hours, but high schools sometimes are. So one thing that students should do is to find out from their high school, is there a requirement for service? And then is there a requirement for National Honor Society? Because often there will be a requirement that a certain number of service hours. But beyond that, for the colleges, they're less interested in the number of hours than seeing sort of a sustained commitment. So ideally, a student can find something that's of interest to them. So if a student is really a serious athlete, perhaps they could volunteer at a camp, or there are some organizations where student athletes work with special education students. Those are all great activities. And I think it's something that then the student will find to be rewarding instead of just checking off a box.
Right. And how would you suggest families begin the college search for their child?
Well, I think that the way to start is to cast a wide net. And a lot of families don't do this. A lot of families that I work with will come in and there are only 2 or 3 schools, or worse, a student has identified one college that they really want to go to. And the problem there is, you know, as we were talking about before the show, it's become very unpredictable. And so if you are targeting a competitive school, it's really not a good idea to allow your child to set her heart on going to Yale or Princeton, because the odds are just very low that even a great student, the acceptance rates there are under 10%. So you don't want to focus on just one school. And you don't want to just narrow your sights even to in-state. Sometimes families will say, well, you know, we can only afford the in-state. But then I would say to them, you need to look, because there's a lot of financial aid out there, both need-based and merit-based. So sort of widen your sights, do a search at the beginning, and then only later sort of do the reality check of saying which of these colleges is the student likely to be accepted to, and which ones can we afford as a family.
Speaking of affording colleges, I just heard recently, and I don't know if this is true, but they said that there are some schools that if the curriculum is not offered in one of our Virginia state schools, that the out-of-state college can offer that tuition at in-state. Is that true?
That is a great question. That's the academic common market. So many of the southern states have gotten together to say, you know, there may be an unusual major that is not available in every state. So if there is a major like that, you can go online to Academic Common Market, and if you can't find it in a Virginia public university and it's available in another one of these cooperating states, you can sometimes go for in-state tuition. So that can be, but
yeah.
it does tend to be your unusual,
right.
You know, equine management or something like
right.
that.
Right.
Most of here in Virginia, our public universities do cover most of your common majors.
So English, if it's an English
if
major,
it's English,
need
it's probably not going to work for you.
All right, so how can you encourage families and tell them how they can find colleges that are affordable? Because college is outrageous.
It really is an outrageous expense. And fortunately, though, Congress passed a law that went into effect in October of 2011 that requires most all colleges to post a net price calculator on their website, or to contract with another organization to provide it. And what this net price calculators do, it's a shortened financial tool that allows families to answer maybe 20 or 30 questions instead of the FAFSA, which is over 100, and to get sort of an early estimate of what the college is going to cost that family rather than the sticker price, because often it's quite different. And the nice thing about these net price calculators is that the information is not going anywhere. It's just a tool for you to play with. So you also don't have to get out your tax forms and be right to the penny, which you do obviously for the FAFSA. So it's very useful information, and the net price is defined as the cost of attendance, which is everything, not just tuition, but room and board, books and supplies, minus any free money that you're likely to qualify for. But it's usually your need-based. So even after you've done that, you shouldn't rule out a college, because if your child is toward the top of the applicant pool, he or she might qualify for merit aid that often has nothing to do with need.
All right, and can you talk about the difference between early decision and early action, and does that really make a difference? Will it help the student?
So the early decision is binding. If you apply to a college early decision, it means that if you're accepted, you're obliged to go there to withdraw your other applications. And colleges take this pretty seriously, so it's not, you can't fool around. The early action, you can be accepted early, you apply early and can be accepted early, but you're not bound to go to that school. You don't have to let them know until May 1st. So that's a very advantageous program for students. And now, one thing I would say is that there are all kinds of different early action. There's restrictive early action, there's regular early action. So it's very important for students to go to the website and make sure they understand what the restrictions are. Can they apply to other schools in the early pool or not? Now, getting to the question of does it help you, the early decision is the most advantageous because you're committing to go to the college. But there are some circumstances where it can be to your disadvantage. So some colleges will deny students in the early pool. So if they look at your application, they may say, you know, you're rejected and we're not going to look at you again. So in that case, it may be to your advantage if your application will be stronger later in the year to wait. But that's still a very small minority of colleges who do that. Most colleges, if they don't accept a student in the early pool, will reevaluate them in the later pool. So it's just important to find out what category a college falls into.
Well, Ellen, this information is so helpful, and I know our viewers are going to really appreciate this. And we've run out of time, but I'd love for you to give a phone number or a way for someone to reach you if they have additional questions. I know I do.
Yeah, thank you. And the best way is really to go at my website, and hopefully that will be available.
Yes, we'll post the website.
I have two websites. One is my business website, and then the other is a free informational website for parents. You don't have to register. It's not a commercial site, but it has all of this information that I've been talking about, plus a lot more.
All right. Well, thank
so hopefully
you
that will be helpful.
Thank you for being with us today. And again, this is Ferrell Tata, and thank you for joining us. Enjoy in our town.
This program has been sponsored by the Trinity Broadcasting Network and made possible by your telethon dollars. Your continual support can keep Joy in Our Town brought to your home every day. So write Joy in Our Town, P.O. Box A, Santa Ana, California, 92711.